I've been intrigued by this notion of specialization and niche and sort of who to target as an audience. That's what prompted me to think about this yesterday as our primary topic. So many people are good at their craft and their independent skill set. They're probably reliable. They probably work hard. They are excellent employees, and capable of getting the work done. But they just struggle so much with this idea of lead generation and getting their foot in the door of a market that they can kind of specialize in and count on to hire them routinely. And it occurred to me that you and I have that pretty locked in by now. I've literally written a book, too, technically, I guess, for a specific industry. And I've kind of doubled down on that forever. So I felt like that was a place that, maybe we'd peel the layers back of this a little bit, talk about how that happened for us and what we can offer to people to get their foot in the door of a market vertical and not just their horizontal skill set, and talk about the approach to that.
Yeah. Like, should you pick a niche? Should it be narrow? Should it be specific? How do you decide that's the right one for you? How do you test it? How do you confirm it's working? What are all the pieces of building that, choosing it, and then, just because I have one doesn't mean I'm not constantly second guessing it. It happens, especially over, 10, 20 years of working through that. So, let's figure that out.
Yeah. I'm not going to remember all those questions you just listed out, by the way.
I'll figure it out.
We'll do our best to track it. We need that little AI thing. We need the exactly. Humane AI thing to go, hey, remember that list and walk us through it. Yeah. Let's start with how we sort of got into the niche areas that we did. So, okay. And maybe even broader than this. Both of us come from what I think you would call a traditional design background, right? Maybe
Sure.
even back in the day, graphic design, singularly. And from there, we have both branched out into, all things marketing, brand strategy, photo, video, storytelling, business strategy, every single deliverable you can think of, we have delivered inside of the whole marketing lead generation space.
It's a brand deliverable, we've delivered it.
Exactly. I often joke, like, skywriting is the only medium I've never worked in. And I would be open to it. So I think that's interesting.
Side
because
point, the one kind of project that I'd love to do, and I say this all the time because whenever somebody's listening, I want them to go, oh, that's our guy. I want to brand an airline. It's not skywriting, but seeing your work literally fly over your head at that kind of scale, I think is just about the coolest thing that I've not touched.
I wish we could go back to the golden era of flight and the airline industry. How amazing and gorgeous.
When airlines were cool.
And honestly, yeah, shout out to American. I think I shared that with you one time, that promo that American Airlines did for their safety briefing thing. That was all kind of shot live with people carrying the props around and everything. Maybe we can link to it, but it's a really fascinating piece for something really utilitarian. And yet it still doesn't come anywhere nearly, the old school branding of the 60s and 70s in airline flight. Anyway, yes, I'm with you.
And still, after you've seen that once on a plane, you're still going to ignore it. Like, okay,
I know, right?
Security briefing. Like, it's different. It works once, but.
Yep. I always go back to that scene in Fight Club where they're handing out the safety cards that they've manipulated and everybody's screaming in complete chaos. That's so dark for people who fly all the time. Very dark. Anyway. So most people, I think they consider their, what we would, again, we talk about like the horizontal and vertical axes, right? So like for me, what I put on the horizontal is your skill sets. And so these are the things that you're good at, your craft, really. And I want people to think about this in terms of their craft. I don't care if this is, design and, copywriting or painting paintings or cooking a meal. Like these are things people associate with craft or craftsmanship. I see management as a craft. I see leadership as a craft. Everything should be considered as a craft. I think we get back to the core human principles when we think about craft. And it also evokes the idea of being a craftsperson and putting the time, the dedication, and the sort of focused intensity into being really good at what you do. And I think that's really critical. And I've kind of been a little mouthy online and in other podcasts and sessions about, I don't have any tolerance anymore for people who aren't committed to being really good. And you can't suddenly get 20 years of experience of being really good when you're 22 years old, but you can definitely have a mindset that is committed to being really good. And that's what you need. And put in the time, put in the effort, put in the practice. We both play guitar, and you know that without that amount of time and effort of just completely sucking forever, and constantly trying to get better and better and better, you're never going to get good unless you just put the time and the effort in constantly to that. And I think every craft works that way. So we've done this on the design side. Everybody has their own, but we know
that's the table stakes. We're not saying you can't just choose a niche in a thing where you don't have the craft, you don't have the skill, you don't have the talent. So I think that's a good baseline. So obviously, that's not what we're talking. We're not saying I want to just focus on the med tech industry and I've never done the first thing or know the first thing about that industry. So
you're right. You've seen my pyramid where I talk about people getting the order correct. And this is why I put skill at the bottom. I could call it your craft as well, but most people just when they see the visual, they know what skill means. Right. And so that's why I say that. That is the baseline. You're absolutely right. I love that table stakes term. There is no game if we don't get this part done. And the other side of that coin is a term we are both familiar with and have used a million times, and that is talent is not enough. So even if you're really good at this, perhaps that makes you good enough, and that's enough to be a really great employee, for sure. But when it comes to running your own business, being really good at your craft is not sufficient. It is not enough. We have to suddenly then shift over to our new craft, which is to build a business, right? And there's a lot of different ways to do that, and we talk about that. So let's talk about, okay, so if that's not enough, then what is, right? Well, we've got all the business skill sets for sure, but none of that even matters unless we have customers willing to pay us. So talk about your journey from early on to sort of finding your way to the niche, or even multiple niches, if you want to name a couple of them, that you enjoy now.
Yeah, I had sort of a series of coincidences and accidents, if you will, that led me to the industry that I focus on most directly. And one of them was sitting with one of my early designers, and we were like, we do really cool work. We should find an industry or type of company where when we put their product in it or put their visuals in it, it makes it even better, as opposed to like somebody who's selling insurance or somebody who's brokering some non-tangible thing. Like, what about furniture architecture? And so we found an interior design firm who needed help with a website. They were working with another consultant, but they didn't have anybody to design it. So we designed this first website for an interior design firm. And then two other architects locally saw that site and liked what we had to do, liked what we had done on that project, and hired us. And one of those two architects was Ratio Design here in Indianapolis. They're now global, basically. And we won best website in the country for this professional services organization. So we sort of accidentally fell into this role where we just did one and it led to another and led to a third and then got a lot of attention. So then we had lots of firms around the country literally asking for, how do I get a Ratio website? So that was 2011, maybe. So we had sort of backed into that really unintentionally. And sort of at the same time, on a local level, I was at a networking event. This was probably in 2006 or so. And there was a guy who was interning for a competitive marketing firm. And I was having a hard time talking about what it was that we did that was different. And, we were friends. I was friends with this intern. And I heard the person he was networking with say, well, we know Josh and we know what he does. How are you different from Josh? And he said, well, they do really like high-end branding work for professional services firms, and we tend to work for smaller companies. And I had never phrased it that way before, but to hear somebody else describe what we did as this high-end brand work for professional services, I was like, we could say that on purpose. So those two things sort of dovetailed. So the high-end brand work for professional services and the architectural engineering and construction niche sort of met each other in the middle, both sort of coincidentally, both sort of by accident. But as you mentioned at the top, like that's when I decided, well, if we're going to work in this space, maybe I should write a book about that. If we're going to work in this space, maybe I should be speaking on that topic. If we're going to work in this space, maybe our portfolio should reflect mostly that kind of work. And so those were a couple of the main levers that we pulled to start to focus and to specialize in the architecture, engineering, and construction space, which is really a high-end professional service.
I love that you inadvertently brought up what most brand strategists know as a cornerstone of what brand really is. And it's my 5th rule of branding out of my 10 rules of branding. And that is that your brand is what they say it is.
Right.
And you just sat there and listened to this other person describe your brand before you had even formalized that in your head. And it was the truth.
No, anybody who's ever said, I wish I could just be a fly on the wall and hear how our competition talks about us or hear about how our prospects really talk about us. And I just happened to get the front row seat to hear that conversation, and they knew it was happening. I don't know if they knew I was listening that well, but it was just wild to hear a prospect and a competitor talking about our company at the same time, and to be able to, and it felt right. So it wasn't like they had us way off, like, oh, they're great for branding restaurants because they did one. Like, yeah, we did lots of one-off stuff, and somebody could have pigeon-holed us for a thing that wasn't a specialization, was just a one-off, but they were talking about stuff that we were doing sort of unintentionally, but over and over.
Yeah. Well, so what strikes me is you're in this is a time in your business and career where you're still very firmly rooted in design for the most part, right?
Yeah,
that
totally.
it's design and marketing solutions that this is highly visual. And you spoke to being drawn to people who needed these type of solutions who also had very highly visual deliverables. And we see that a lot in the design world. You know, people are very attracted to the restaurant. They're very attracted to the, microbrewery, right? Because they've got packaging and promotional materials and things that are just highly visual and experiential. And we're kind of drawn to those.
Yeah.
Versus
where you've talked over and over, like early days of my business, we would have 60, 75 clients and a lot of little design projects because they were so design leaning in the early days. Like, people would need a logo or a business card or a vehicle wrap or something like that. And in the early days, we did all of those kind of one-off projects. And I was always trying to move the business into more holistic brand work, into how do we do more ongoing work for you throughout the year as opposed to just this one-off.
That's the Holy Grail, right? I mean, we know that that's the trick. And this is what's so difficult, I think, for people starting out. They have to sort of, I kind of look at it like a hallway in a hotel, and you got all these doorways everywhere, and some are firmly locked no matter what you do. I mean, in real life, they're always locked, but like pretend that you can access these doors. Don't go down hotel room doors and start trying them out, people. So in this world, you can open most of these doors. Some you can't. They're gate kept, and I'm sorry. You're not going to get in there directly by trying to open the door. But most of the time, you can kind of open and peek in and figure out, hey, this room may have more opportunity for me. That one I didn't really enjoy that market, whatever. And you kind of have to go out and test these waters a little bit before you find the one that makes sense. You spoke about something. So an insurance company, for example, is not highly visual typically, right? And somewhat kind of boring in comparison to something that's really amazing, like a 42-story high-rise construction project going up in the AEC space that all the way to finish includes people working and living and operating inside of it, right? That is tons of highly visual, really high-quality work. Except until you get to that scale, you might be doing the one-off vehicle wrap, the one-off logo, the one-off tiny little thing for the smaller companies. So it's really highly visual, but you've never found that company who has those routine needs, those repeat big budgets and campaign work. And that's where I think it's kind of serendipitous for you to find something like the AEC space where, literally billions are spent constantly all the time on that space globally. And they're always highly visual.
Yeah, not billions on branding, but
yes. Steel, glass, land, all of it. So the thing that stood out to me when you talked about that, because you are so highly visual as a designer, your mind immediately went to, how do I write a book about this? How do I demonstrate thought leadership in this? And your book, it's not a picture book. It's not look at us, all these pretty things that we can do. It's a book about the challenges that this industry faces, a way to frame those challenges with, concrete solutions and to wrap their heads around what to do to execute on any of the strategies, that they make. To my knowledge, I don't remember there being a single like picture in the whole thing, right? So here you are going, okay, I recognize that this is a place where I have an opportunity, that I open this door and I see there's 20 other doors in here. This is good. I have a lot of opportunity here. And immediately your mind goes to, how can I be the expert who can solve the problems that these people have in this industry? I think that's the single most critical step that people need to start taking. And I don't care if it's something from my past, for example, small batch coffee roasters. Right. You remember, we both technically worked for this client at one point, right?
Right.
It could have been very easy to go specialize in that. I know people who specialize in only marketing and branding services for small batch coffee roasters, and they do a great job. In fact, I think that's who the same company ended up kind of working with. At last I checked, was somebody who was like, this is all we do.
Yeah.
It's very
surprising.
Yeah. And they should. They really should. Not that our work wasn't fantastic for them, but that was never going to be something we were going to commit to long term. It just wasn't an industry that we were going to make those roots grow as deep as somebody else might, right?
Sure.
The person who's willing to do that is checking off all of these really critical boxes. So when we go into this talent is not enough thing, when I'm talking about your baseline horizontal of skill sets, now we're starting to talk about, well, now who do you serve? And this is where, in addition to being really, really, really good at your craft on the baseline, design, photography, copywriting, whatever it is, now you have to talk about being really, really good at understanding the challenges, the problems, the mindset, the relationships, all of the things that go into serving a group of people. And in your case, AEC firms, fit. So you think, okay, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to make sure I know and understand exactly what their problems are. I'm going to start meeting people and networking inside of that event. You were on the freaking board or whatever of, the top, group that represents them, the professional association for them. You and I both have experience doing that in design as well. There are so many ways to demonstrate your expertise now once you pick a vertical that is impossible to do in the model that you had earlier where you had 52 clients. You can't be the expert on all of those things. But then so many people get stuck in their mind that I'm an expert at my craft. But they don't make that connection. Talk about why it's so critical to make that connection between I'm an expert at the craft and I'm also an expert inside of this particular industry. And kind of, because you've done that so beautifully through AEC.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about forming that bond between those two, the vertical and the horizontal.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people struggle with that because they're like, oh, I'm going to get pigeon-holed. I'm only going to be able to do that kind of work. Then I'm going to get bored with it. I'm going to, I wish I could do other things. I wish I could work for those shiny industries. I want to, as we've already talked about at length, I want to work for the coffee shop or for the brewery or for the high tech, whatever, and I maybe I want to try something different. Picking a niche, picking a vertical and specializing doesn't preclude you from being able to do that other work. I think if anything, when you're known for one thing in particular, first of all, you're probably not working nearly as hard to get the next client in that space. So to have clients that are funding your business, that are really supporting what you do, those clients, as I used to joke, those are the fish that jump in the boat. Yep. Like you don't even have to work that hard to go find them. They're excited to work with you because they see you as the leading expert in that space. And then on the flip side, like there's almost like, why would you want to go make it difficult now? Why would you want to make it harder than that? And also, if you do have an entire school of fish who are trying to jump in your boat, you can go work at those little side projects and, okay, let's do a brewery, let's do a whatever else. But those aren't things that you necessarily put on your website or market or confuse the market about to say, oh, and we also do this really oddball thing that we thought was fun. Maybe that's interesting to you, or maybe that's interesting to the next brewery or coffee shop that you want to show that to. But But that's going to confuse the heck out of all of the AEC clients, in my case, who are looking at the website and going, wait, what does he do? We wanted to work with him because their firm was the expert. They were focused. This is what they do. This is where their experience is. So, why would we still be interested if they seem to be distracted now? Maybe they're changing their focus. There's a lot of reasons, I think, why going off the rails there in terms of your focus is a bad idea. But I think more often than not, people have a hard time committing to what's that focus going to be. Who is that group? Who's the vertical? Who's the audience? And I think, like you said, it really does start with a platform of talent. Like, what are you good at? What can you demonstrate that you've had success in, and that you've developed processes? When you're in a meeting with that kind of client, the kinds of questions they're going to ask you already. Kinds of the infighting that their partners and principals might have. Right. What their challenges are when it comes to hiring. What their challenges are for standing out and looking and sounding and being measurably different than their competition. And that can work for any industry. Pick it. So in your case, you ended up kind of in the parallel universe of of real estate investment trusts and kind of working in that commercial property space, which is like really similar and also really different from where I live. Yeah. So it's more like on the owner side, it's more like the built environment is already built, and then now what do you do with it? Where my side of the fence is more like nothing exists yet and we have to create it. Right. How did you end up there?
Yeah, definitely. I'll walk through that process. You unpacked a lot of really valuable nuggets right there that I want to do that I want to address before we go into my story.
Sure.
This idea of being pigeon-holed, okay, look, is there a line of selling your soul or committing to something you hate just because it's accessible? Yeah, there is. There really is. When I think of this,
Which
why,
is
by
not
the
what
way,
we're advocating for here.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Don't choose the thing that makes you miserable.
No, not at all. And the smaller and leaner the business, the more critical that becomes.
Yeah.
With that said, this is why I distinguish between capital E entrepreneurs from lowercase kind of entrepreneurs. I do think there's a difference, and I'll try to clarify that for a second. A capital E entrepreneur, in my opinion, their craft is starting, building, and selling businesses. That's what a capital E entrepreneur really is to me. That's the act and the craft of finding opportunities to build and then sell a business. And then they go and they do it again. And they go and they do it again. And they're really good at that.
So many of those guys would also put another word in front of it, and they would say, we are serial entrepreneurs, which lends itself even more so to your definition.
Yeah, it does. It reinforces this concept, right? That's their goal. That's what they want to do. And when you look at those people, they are often in those industries where you're like, I would jump off a tower if I had to work in that industry for more than 2 weeks. And they're like, yeah, it's cool because I don't work in it. All of my teams always work in it. I'm the one just guiding, leading, and worrying about revenue, profit, and then overall value for the valuation when I go to sell, right? That's what excites them. It's not the fact that they're selling insurance, And on the other end, when we're talking about solo founders, people who run super lean businesses like we do in the hub model that I advocate for, it's very personal. And you think to yourself, well, I'm going to be spending every day doing this kind of work, in our case, design work. I don't want to be every single day doing yet another folder packet thing for some insurance salesperson. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to do that.
I just had some really awful flashbacks.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I don't want to get any PTSD going. You're right. I think I actually remember what those looked like you. Oh, wow. Okay, so
They were pretty.
They were top notch for what they were. You kind of have this gut feeling of like, well, I have to execute the work and do it, right? Unlike the serial entrepreneur who's like, I don't ever touch any of that stuff. I don't care. There's people who are perfectly happy showing up 9 to 5, going home and forgetting about everything they did. We don't have that luxury. But here's the other problem that we have is if we're not profitable, there's no good work to do anyway. It's all moot. So when we talk about talent is not enough, we have to learn how to run and operate businesses. And part of running and operate businesses is to make sure that they can consistently generate revenue and maintain profitability. Because I don't care if you're designing the hottest work on the planet. If it doesn't pay, you're not doing it for long. And it is a very miserable existence to go through every single week wondering where your next dollar is going to come from as you watch your profitability get eaten away. We can't accept that the actual craft and the work that we want to execute every single day is the whole equation. It's simply not. So to your point, how much
there's an
time?
ugly baby step up from that too, which is it's just profitable enough that I can do this forever and I hate it.
Yes.
I think that's where a lot of, where a lot of agency employees or in-house marketing employees find themselves, which is it pays just enough and I'm miserable.
That's right.
I have a hard time leaving because I have the security here, whether you're an owner or a creative director or, a lower level design employee, nothing wrong with any of those seats. But if you're locked into that job because it pays just enough and you're miserable, that feels like one of the worst spots to be in.
Well, I'm again happy that you're bringing up what is another rule of branding for me and also my own personal trademark, which is lukewarm is death. And that's exactly what you're describing, because this is where you're stuck in that middle ground of it's kind of fine, kind of not, but it pays. It's, this terrible existence where your soul just slowly gets sucked out of you, over time. You wake up and you're 72 and realize you can't do anything about it because you're out of time. We can't have that. And it's my first rule of branding, because that's how people feel about stale, boring, lukewarm brands. They're not on fire for it. They're not interested in it. You spoke to this in the title of your book for the AEC firms when you called it Bold Brand, right? That's your company's name as well. That's the same concept. Is you have to cross a threshold of energy and excitement, or you're not going to get anywhere. There's just no way. And back to the idea that the talent is tied to this, you have to have a passion for what you're doing. You have to be bold in what you're doing. And there is an upper echelon of every industry that affords you some of the hottest work. If you think of AEC, and I'll get back to my industry niche, or primary niche, I'll call it, which is, retail REITs. There are projects I have done inside of there that is this is really boring. If I had to do this every day, this would suck. But doing that work, I always, this brings me back to a really core principle, and I want people to really hear this. We talked about this back when we were eating breakfast at A to Z Cafe. I learned early that you can choose projects or you can choose clients. And you better know the difference. And the people who want everything handed on a silver platter to them, and the place that you were stuck at there for a while with 55 clients before you found a really powerful vertical niche to run with, is one-off projects. And you can make them look really great and really hot and do your best work inside of all those projects. This goes for anybody providing a professional service. But if you want clients, and by clients, I mean they sign you for a year, they have a budget of $200, $500, $800,000, and they're going to spend six figures on you every single year over and over. And all of your work is tied to bigger picture strategic approaches and marketing plans and other campaigns that are happening. And you're building out what traditional agencies used to do that we're capable of doing now and have been doing for over a decade. If you want that, guess what? Clients have very difficult and messy challenges that aren't always going to be handed to you on a silver platter with white gloves. You're every now and then going to have to go in and unclog the toilet. Okay. That's just the way it's going to work. But that is the thing that builds the trust.
Metaphorically.
To be clear, I've never cleaned a toilet for my clients. Okay. You have to take care of all of their little needs, right? Imagine any relationship working that way. Oh, I want to hang out with you and it's really fun. But if you ever need me for anything that's difficult, sorry, I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you're telling. You may as well give the middle finger to your client. And this is precisely where so many agencies have ended up too, by the way, is they get to the point where profitability and the numbers and the size and the scope, they don't want to handle those little one-off, $2,000, $8,000, dollar projects, whatever they are inside that market.
Right.
That's the golden opportunity for the people like us and the younger designers to come in and say, hey, I'm more than happy to handle that and I'll knock it out. And now the calculus of the customer is, hey, This person is ridiculously reliable, works really hard, shows up on time, gets everything done, and has a positive attitude, and always says, give me something more I'll solve your challenges. I will take away your pain. While the agency is over there going, yeah, that doesn't quite smell as good as I anticipated. Send it back to the kitchen, right? Like the client has a lot more calculus going on in their head than just what do they cost and what do they do. And if you can be really good at what you do and you can build teams around you like we have, you can solve those challenges faster and better and cheaper. That is not easy to do, right? You know that old thing of like choose two. You can have two of those three at any given time. That model, the model that we advocate, allows you to do all three. But you have to know how to build the model. Okay, back to answering your question.
And
Retail
cheaper doesn't mean cheap.
No.
Cheaper
to be
means
clear,
less than a behemoth agency is going to charge.
There you go.
To underserve it. Right.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that actually, because
Yes.
that's really critical. And I try to emphasize that does not mean you are cheap. No way. Not at all.
Right.
It's the fact that what you can do for $30,000, the agency has to charge $65,000 because all of their bloated overheads that they have to pay for in order to achieve that same objective. You can do it for 30. Now, the faster part becomes tricky because you may not be able to, bring in the C team who's willing to work overnight and take a kick to the teeth every single, day until they finally burn out and go to a different place. But if you build the right teams, you can absolutely still meet those deadlines. And in my experience, the agencies aren't that fast.
Yeah.
Okay. Retail real estate. So when we talk about real estate investment trusts in retail, the largest is Simon. Think shopping malls, mixed use centers, outdoor, community centers, all these big, massive projects that are going up that have, shops and restaurants and living and working. And, there's every flavor of them, frankly, all the way down to like glorified strip malls that some of these people still have, that it's like, hey, the shopping, the supermarket there does really well. That's everybody has to go to the groceries, right? And then all the way up to these mega centers that, have every top hot retailer you can think of and 1,000-unit apartment complexes and condos and things like that. That's kind of the world that I went into. And it's a similar story. I mean, I got introduced to that when I was still working for the, last design agency I worked for, he had a client in that space who was doing some really cool work, and we did some incredible work together. I learned so much from him about how to do that. And I come from a background where, my dad builds homes. I grew up on construction sites. For me, the idea of the built and physical environment was such an important part of the story. And a lot of my clients also are in the construction and architecture side for projects. It's not 10% of what they do, but they still do that kind of thing. So telling that story is really amazing. I mean, we worked together on the Bottleworks story here in Indianapolis, where you were helping me with audio out in the field, where we're literally wearing hard hats and palling around with the construction guys. And that's right up my alley. I love that. I love watching those guys.
That fits this head is no small task.
It's definitely not a small task. It's just, the sparks flying, the greasy fingernails, the guys with dust all over them. I love that. That's where I want to be. So that's really exciting. And then I also go back to the very nature of building a small community center near some, suburban mega city, wherever in America, that just does a really great job of making a convenient place for people to go and grab what they need and, have coffee together at the local cafe and come out of there. I love those stories. So I kind of fell in love with that pretty early. And down the road after I had left that agency, one of the people I had worked with while I was at that agency they were the client, they left their company and went to a totally new opportunity, and they called me and wanted me to come help them because of the amount of dedication and effort and time and, focus on them that I put into them. And that kind of kickstarted my opportunity to get into that space. And from that point forward, I didn't write a book for them, but it was the same deal. I obsessed over their needs constantly and talked about them constantly and made it very clear that that was something that we were really good at doing. And I also did everything I could to inject those solutions into my work so people could see that it was, again, my tagline for Sandpaper Studio, my company, is that we are the full service anti-agency. And this is this idea that, I'm not an agency. Do not call me a traditional agency in that world, but we still take care of everything that you need. And my portfolio reflected that. And that's something that, just talk about not being boring, like we approached every single medium, from literally signage and wayfinding for these massive 250,000 square foot, enclosed centers, to identity and promotional materials for them, to shooting video and doing audio. And, there's so much work inside of that type of client space. People might think, oh yeah, shopping centers, really? And yet it afforded me the opportunity to do more breadth of, design deliverables than some of my other clients who were gigantic that just really had one kind of laser focused need at any given time. So I kind of did the same thing. I got in and I just obsessed over what they really actually needed and made sure I was really good at those things and delivered constantly on them. And that led to me at one point working with 8 of the top 10 kind of REITs in our own local market, our own, smaller market. And the reason it was only 8 out of 10 is I told the other 2 I didn't want to work with them when they approached me. And it slowly came to, just whittling it down to the couple that I wanted, because me, I don't want a million clients. Right. And that was really kind of how I went about it too, but again, it was going to be very obvious and clear to me that I was the person that market could count on if they wanted that work done, even though I was only picking 1 or 2 to work with at any given time.
Sure. And, something you said about kind of the breadth of things you were able to do by working with REITs, I think you could structure your niche in reverse. Like, all I want to do is UX, or all I want to do is identity work. And then I work with a more broad vertical. So I think you could squeeze your horizontal down and then broaden out how many verticals that you want to add on there. I think that's possible. And I think a lot of, especially design oriented firms, think about things that way. Like, oh, I just want to do logos, or I just want to do UX, or I only want to do mobile apps. Like, I think that's possible.
It is.
But I definitely have always felt wired a little bit more that it's easier to understand the client first and then figure out what that client needs, which may mean like, I'm not doing mobile apps for AEC firms. I've never had a request for one. So there are probably things that you don't do based on who that vertical is. But I think the understanding of that client and knowing what they need and helping solve their problems makes it so much easier than just being someone who's like, well, all I do is logos, and not really getting what different types of industries need when it comes to visual identity.
I completely agree. Yes, you can do it. And I've known people who have pulled that off. I've watched a lot more crash and burn. And even agencies, I'm thinking of one in particular locally years and years and years ago who was like, identity's our thing. That's what we do. Identity's our thing. And they just completely withered on the vine because they couldn't find enough people that they couldn't talk about that. And as that became more and more commoditized, it's like, well, the identity's not really what I'm looking for. I need everything else that goes around why we got to that identity, and how do we distribute that back out into all of our marketing, and how do we affect our internal culture based on the approach that we're taking externally to our customers, so that we can tie those two together and strengthen our brand holistically. These are the kinds of things that the customers are asking for now. That's what they want. They want more holistic needs. That's something that a lot of smaller, again, people like in our space, the solo and lean founders, who are trying to be really good at what they're doing. They're like, well, if I'm going to get really good at something, let's call it After Effects, right? Like, I have a friend that is phenomenal After Effects guy, and he's struggling like crazy. I'm starting now to go, okay, I think he sees what I can do to help him here about how he needs to get sort of into an industry, because it's not evident to these people looking at his stuff that it's like, well, this is really, really great for the people you're serving. Right. And he's like, well, I can do this for you. And they're going, how? They don't get it. They don't intrinsically understand it, because he's never shown them how he can use his skill set to solve their bigger and broader problems. I will also say, you're at a real risk if you're not careful with our model, because if I'm Mr. After Effects, and for anybody who's not familiar with that, these are the animations of like logos and data and all the way to like special effects in movies. Like, After Effects is a ridiculously powerful program, but companies are using that more and more to animate, data and stats and trend lines and, bring presentations to life, that kind of thing. So if I'm really, really, really good at that, that's really cool, until an agency comes along who's quite good at that too. Except they also solve all the other problems, and they bundle that into a larger budget that allows them to now even start undercutting you. you're in real trouble as the outsider who's supposed to come in and be this one little one-off vendor is what you're going to look like to them. That's something that I think is very dangerous. I'm much more interested in helping people kind of find opportunities to eventually expand into, hey, I take care of all of your needs inside of this particular, horizontal skill set.
It's like a chef who only understands how to season the food.
That's such a good analogy.
Like you want the meal.
God,
I don't
man.
just need the meat seasoned. I don't
They're
just
gonna
need the
bring in
vegetable seasoned. I want
Can
the
you
whole
imagine?
thing.
Well, the way that I work, they get the meat and the meal prepared, and I come in toward the tail end to sprinkle my magic. Oh man, that's such a good analogy. And look, this is difficult because, especially for younger people, because they are probably have already been working their butt off to get really good at just the one thing, You think of photographers, like this is another kind of example, right? You get the photographers who are constantly filling their portfolios with, well, I can do corporate headshots, and I can do events, and I can do weddings, and I can do real estate, and I can do sunsets because I collected all these wonderful sunset photos that I do too, even though nobody buys them, and here's my portfolio. Look at how good of a photographer I am. Anybody who's really good and getting paid well at wedding photography right now is laughing because they know that the photos are like the least of the worries in terms of managing the skill set and your value. Same thing with real estate on our side. When I look at the photo and video, like any dude could walk out with a camera and get a great dusk shot of a building, but that doesn't tell the story of retail in our case. There's a whole other set of components that they're looking for, not to mention being on time and getting it done and delivering it to the client painlessly so that they can use it in their marketing. All of these different factors that go into helping the client, you can figure that out by talking to those clients. This is something, so when I talk about opening those doors, let's go back to this part. Okay, fine. I believe you, Josh and Torrey. I want to find a market vertical, and I think I have some opportunities. How can I find them? How can I identify them? Where do I start? Because I will work my butt off to get it done. I just need to know how to get started. What's your advice for somebody they're 28 years old. She's done an awesome job as an employee, saved up her money. She's ready to rock, and she's going to start her own company. She's got some good contacts, but she just hasn't figured out that vertical yet. Like, what are we going to do to get her started?
I think checking your work. So you've guessed this is the industry I want to work in. If I Google that thing, can I find some? Are there people on LinkedIn who are talking about this thing? Are there other agencies or other specialists who maybe serve a different side of that market? Is there a photographer or video company who serves that and you want to do brand work for them or you want to do website work for them? Who else is talking to that market? Do they exist? A lot of the stereotype in the early 2000s for students coming out of design school was so many of them were like, I don't want to do anything digital, and I just want to do packaging and identity, and I want to do it for little local restaurants and coffee shops and breweries. Like that, for whatever reason, kind of became the stereotype for these young design students. And the reality was, if you had a portfolio of those clients, you'd be out of business in 5 seconds because none of them had a budget. All of these little local startups largely were shoestring budgets, and you couldn't string together enough of those kind of clients to actually build a portfolio, let alone support yourself for a year. So I think determining is this a sustainable market? Does it actually exist? And is it something that I can find? I mean, that's a good first step, but then I think you actually have to get your feet wet. Find your first client, learn things from that client, and build out some expertise before you try to put your shingle out as this is what I specialize in if it's a market you haven't actually worked in yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's break this down a little bit. Profitability is one. And you're right. Those kids back then, while everybody was thinking forward to, hey, what is this website stuff I hear about, right? We're so old. But this is still happening today. Right? Sure. Like every new technology round that comes along, people are like, no, I just want to stay in this other thing. And they're not staying ahead of the game. Okay. So there's two possibilities in my mind. Like our fictitious young woman either has a job or doesn't. Okay. And maybe she has a job doing exactly the kind of stuff she wants to do, and already has a portfolio built for at least similar markets or something that's at least tangential, if not the exact same type of market. That's ideal. And that's where I tell people to start all the time. Hey, if you're young.
That's a great starting spot.
Yes. If you want to get really good at your craft, I have an idea. Go find somebody who will take all the weight, all the pressure, work backwards. All of the need for the business to be running and operating, the sales, the marketing, the billing, the tax paying, the overheads, the routine, farming out, to whoever for overflow, and then also to find new clients to avoid feast and famine. Like, why don't we find somebody who takes all that pressure off of you, and in exchange for them taking the pressure off of you, you accept a little less pay, while you then fixate on getting really, really, really freaking good at your horizontal skill set.
Sure. While
you're doing that, this is exactly what I call make your boss fund your startup. This is the process. This is how it works. You find the best possible job you can with the best access to the best work and the best people. Period. That's what you're looking for, not the best pay. I did not say that. Sometimes that means the best pay. Sometimes it doesn't. Your job is to get really freaking good at what you're doing first. Your second job is to get to know every single person you can inside of that network. Fellow designers in this case, or copywriters, or whoever, whatever, pick whatever it is you do. Get to know all of them. The third is to start to demonstrate some sense of intellectual leadership. Start to listen to what their bigger problems are. Start to go, hey, I've noticed that the client is constantly fixated on this one thing that has nothing to do with my skill set, but they seem to really need that. Okay, let me talk about how I can help them solve that. Get to know those people. Expand your LinkedIn profile. Get them build your networks out there. It's never been easier. Imagine, because we are old. Back in the day, we had to literally find the people and shake their hands. Like that was like, that's how that was done, right? Today,
which is still not a bad approach. It's just a harder one to follow because we're not all going to in-person events at the same rate that we were 20 years ago.
That's right. And I love in-person and real networking, and you do too. But it's much, much, much easier to get to those people. And by the way, it's much easier for everybody too, which is why it's so critical that you have another layer to your message, which is I understand your problems and your needs, and I can prove it. Look.
Yeah. So you just DM them on Twitter, right?
I mean, reach out to them cold and sell them something really cheap and crap. Sell them something they already have. That's the way to do it. Yeah. Reach out to the person that has a really great following and say, hey, I noticed you're interested in growing your audience. I have 73 followers. I'll help you. Right. Don't get me started. You know what you're doing. You're baiting me into this. Okay. No,
but you can
don't
follow them around the internet and comment on their things and like them and like actually on a digital level, create relationship with these people in the way that you might have in the real world otherwise.
Are you suggesting that people value this thing you call relationships, Josh? That who they know matters to them? And trust is a factor here? It sounds like that's what you said. Because I've been told that you just spam people to death with stupid offers that they don't need until 1% bite. And that's how you make your fortune.
That's not rule number 6 of Torrey's branding?
No, it didn't make the top 10. Okay, so get your skill set right. Get it right. And by the way, there's a big difference between doing fictitious brewery company packaging, portfolios. It's fine. People will assume that you can at least execute the visual side. That's good. If you can't get access to something that you want to do, you have to mock some things up, okay? Or give it away for free or do something. You have to get something done. But it's much better to go, well, who's the local agency who's serving that market and has a really good team? I want a job with them and get really good at what I'm doing. Okay, they're going to be a lot more patient with the fictitious portfolio that you bring to them and go, look, I can get this executed. I can actually get this done. You can make money off of me, people. So let's see this happen, right? Start me as a freelancer. I'll get it done for you. There's way too many ways to do that. And then you can build, what you're doing is you're building your proof of work. You're saying, I can actually handle this. So once you get into actually being able to handle it for the client and you're doing the work, that literally means that your boss is paying you to turn around and then sell your work to the client for 3 times what they paid you to do it. It's proof that the client will pay you to do the work. Once again, that's not sufficient because you actually have to run a business that can actually handle delivering all the work, right? That's what your boss is doing right now. That person you think is an idiot that you can do better than, well, guess what? That's what they're actually doing for you. So again, if you want to make them fund your startup, you have to get really, really good at your horizontal skill set. You use them for an opportunity to access the highest work. If they can't access the highest work, leave and find somebody who can. The next is to practice and get really good in your free time. Don't just wait for your 9 to 5 to deliver it. Expand your skill set, expand your network, and expand your knowledge base for the niches that you actually want to approach and start demonstrating some thought leadership there. Expand that thought leadership to your social media profiles, to your website that you should have. It's not that hard. You can go onto Card right now and build a website for next to nothing. Okay, like build out a freaking website, invest in yourself. Be somewhere more than just social media, but fill your social media with all of the things necessary to prove when people look you up or when they validate you, and I'll talk about that in a minute, it's clear that you know what you're doing and that you're worth a shot. So now you can get that whole defensibility side taken care of for the baseline skill sets so they don't have to question, well, can they even do the work? Now we can get that moving. Right. Once you have that established, during your job, you can start freelancing. You can start reaching out directly to that small client. You can find that brewery who doesn't have much of a budget and needs good work. And you're like, hey, listen, in exchange for free beer for 6 months, I'll do whatever. Okay, cool. You know, like you're going to be able to find those opportunities. It's important to pick the niche that you want to go after. But at first, in my opinion, it's just important to get experience serving clients. It doesn't matter. That's your first checkbox. You got to get comfortable with billing, estimating, collecting payments, scoping projects, managing their expectations. You're learning all of that while still you're getting your paycheck from your 9 to 5. This is the ideal. Okay. If you can build that up and then you can build a freelancing portfolio, now you have a portfolio disconnected from the portfolio you're making at your 9 to 5. You can turn around and start to talk about how to sell that to direct clients who have bigger budgets. You need one opportunity. The moment you find one opportunity, that's that foot in the door. You found it with the AEC side. Ratio was probably an example of that for you. For me, you know, that company was Kite, a big retail REIT. So from there, everything branches out. You just need that first domino to fall. Then you begin to just build and practice your skill set as a business person inside of that vertical. You continue to dominate the narrative. You continue to know or broadcast that you know what you're talking about, that you're the leader, that you can take care of those things. And then you get happy customers saying, hey, all that's true. Because and I call that closing the loop. You can broadcast all day and say you're great. But when you have clients who say you're great for you to their friends in private, that's how real business is built. Word of mouth will always win. So that's kind of my, I kind of took the mic there and ran with it for a minute, but like that to me is like, hey, this is how we can kind of get started in picking, a profitable niche and starting to attack it while using the scaffold of a job. And so why don't maybe you could say, okay, that's cool. What if you don't have a job? Mm-hmm. What if you're good? And let's say you just got laid off because your boss sucked, mismanaged the business, and you just got laid off. And you've got enough money to start, but you're scared. You haven't really done it yet. You've got 6 months of runway. Now what? I just put you right on the spot. Tell me if you want me to soften that down a little bit.
What if Josh gets hit by a bus? Answer that. No, I think just to reiterate what you were saying, that you said at the top of the conversation, that your craft and your skill is number one. And I think what you alluded to is your network and your ability to make connections is number two. And then to take those two things and start doing some real work is number three. So yeah, if I had 6 months and had to start fresh, my skill set doesn't change. So I have that as kind of a starting point. I would go build a new network of people in whatever space. Like if AEC went away tomorrow, I'd go pick a new space and I'd start to learn about it. And I would volunteer on the local organization chapter for that thing. So I'm in there, hearing the conversations, meeting more people who are in leadership who are also interested in helping that industry along. And I would just soak up everything that I could, and also start with a small project and start to grow from there. So if I had to do it over, I think that's the way it would work is to take that skill set, build a fresh network from the ground up. And you could totally do that digitally too. It doesn't have to be an in-person thing where you volunteer and go and meet at somebody's office after work and sit on a board. You can do that digitally. There are opportunities on LinkedIn. There are mastermind groups. There are plenty of places that you can take that same approach and make it digital.
That's immediately where my mind went. I'm glad that you mentioned the physical real world because so many people overlook that and that's ridiculous. Right. But yeah, go right now. There's communities for every single type of sub community on LinkedIn. You can go join every single one of them. And in 1 month, you'd have an idea of exactly what their top 5 common priorities are and be able to find a way to modify all of your content to serving that. And then reaching out to people without, hey, do you want to buy crap from me? You don't know who I am. I'm a stranger. Right. But instead, reaching out to people, I have no problem with cold outreach. I'm all for cold outreach. I love cold outreach when it comes to building relationships. Hey, sure. I noticed you've been a marketing director for 7 years at this company that I have a lot of experience working in that industry. I wanted to ask you about this one thing that I noticed that you were talking about last week. It's really a big deal. And I've seen that too. How do you think, what do you need to solve that better? Like, what's your take on that? Why do you think that's such a challenge? Guess what? When somebody's getting 99 messages of, hey, buy from me, I have this crap you don't want. And then they see that message pop up and they go and they look at your profile. They see you're in the industry. They see you're young. They see you're hungry. They see you're getting after it. They're going to go, I'm definitely responding to this person. Yeah. And you get a relationship started right there. There's the seed planted. It blows my freaking mind that people don't know that this is how it works. I don't know what it is. I thought at first maybe it's just the circles that were forming around me on social media or something. And it turns out, no, it's not that. School sucks. Apparently they don't teach people this stuff. So it's really critical that somebody teaches them this stuff because I even there's this whole thing about trashing on networking these days that it's just like collecting trading cards is what they'll say. And I'm like, okay, well, there are people who do that. There's no question there are people who do that. Yeah. But every serious person, do you know a single successful person who doesn't have a powerful network?
No, zero.
Right? It's impossible. Sorry. Screw everybody who says otherwise. They're lying to you and selling you something that's a lie. Right? So you can call it a different word if you want, but the idea is the act of building a powerful network, that's called networking. And as long as you take the attitude that it's about your relationships with everybody inside that network, you're going to do just fine. So don't listen to anybody. That's my advice to people. Like, don't listen to anybody trying to tell you that networking is ridiculous. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
I mean, take that for every possible approach, right? There's a dumb version of all of them.
Yes.
Like social networking. Yep. There's a dumb version of that. TikTok and Instagram or whatever. There's really dumb ways to do that. There are really smart ways to do that. So I think it's not hard to find the thing to pick on within an approach. But this is not the yellow pages. This is not such a dated, out of touch idea that just simply isn't going to work for anybody. This is the thing. You just have to do it correctly, like that's intentionally, right. And go there with a plan of what that looks like. Hey, I don't need to go to this thing and sell my services to anyone here. I'm making contacts here.
Yes.
I may not meet a single future client, but I almost guarantee you're going to meet someone who knows your future client.
Yes.
Yeah, you tell your story well enough, that's going to resonate with them. They're going to go back to their best friend or to their whoever, their boss, and say, hey, you need to meet Torrey because he does exactly what we're looking for.
It makes me think about like probability, and stacking up momentum. Mm-hmm. So if you take 100 shots and 99 miss, right? What's a game that like proximity matters? I'm trying to think of anything like skee ball or something, right? Like the center hole. Sure, you're always going for that, but let's say like it's either all or nothing.
Well, darts, right?
Oh yeah, darts. Sure, of course. I don't go to bars. You know this, or play darts. Yeah, sure. If you aim for bullseye every single time, boom, 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 boom. But let's pretend it's only the bullseye. You have a dartboard that's only the bullseye, and then a regular dartboard. Who's going to win? The person that's just obsessive over I have to hit the bullseye every single time and they're really not even that good at it? Or the person who's literally blindfolded, just throwing in the general direction of a freaking dartboard? Like if you just start talking to people, planting seeds and treating them like humans and actually trying to understand legitimate value exchange and do the freaking homework to be good at what you're doing and care, there's a 0% chance that you aren't out competing every single throw crap up against the wall and see what sticks, idiot out there. It's obvious to me, but you have to have a mindset for playing the long game, actually treating people like humans rather than meat, and a commitment to being really good at the value you want to provide to them. So let's kind of recap. Let's dial this in and kind of wind down on it.
Well, I think as you go there, That's a great visual. The darts concept is a great visual for what we're talking about today in terms of audience and niche. If you are aiming at that center bullseye and you don't hit AEC, you hit the next thing out. You hit subcontractors. So aiming over and over and over at that thing that you want to hit, there are lots of other healthy targets that surround that you're still going to score on.
Exactly right. If you look at retail, I could have gone out and targeted retailers, right? Go walk around in a shopping mall, look at all the hottest logos. The retailer market has packaging and advertising and window displays and all kinds of campaigns. I've worked on some of them. They're hot. It's amazing, right? It's also extraordinarily challenging and difficult to get into on the, national or global level. Now on the smaller level you can, but again, budgets are rough, right? Enter the tangential market, which is the place that houses all of them. And I get to do equally cool work for the most part, you know what I mean, with a totally different niche set that most people would overlook. And you're absolutely right. But if I was fixated constantly on just nonstop throwing crap up against the wall without any regard whatsoever for who I was planting seeds with, I would have never found out that market existed. So you're absolutely right, man. Okay, so first of all, understanding that talent isn't enough, but you better be freaking good at your craft. And from that point forward, establishing a market that you can actually grow a niche into. We just kind of said, we want to look for profitability. We want to look for accessibility, right? So if you already have experience serving a market like we did, let me take my example. Like I had a job where that was a big part of our set of clients. Like we served a lot of those type of clients. It only made natural sense that my portfolio was filled with that kind of work and I understood them and I talked about their needs. I was able to leverage my job perfectly to launch into that industry. And I could have done, when I look back, by the way, I sucked at a lot of this stuff. Like I wish I could have gone back and, like if I had regrets or something, that would be a regret. Like that I didn't spend more time obsessing over it. I would have caught traction way faster. Right. But this is why we know to teach others to do it. So you have to pick an industry that has some sort of opportunity and accessibility. And I would say some sort of logical extension to the type of work that you're doing and the type of work you like to do so that you can defend your ability to pull it off. And then making sure that when they come to look at you and validate you, because this is what professionals do, they go and they look at your social media profile and your posts and your website and your work. Make sure that it's aligning with the things you're telling them and that they can go, wow, this is impressive. Like this person really knows what they're doing. That allows you then to open up the conversation to say, hey, give me a chance. I've talked about this all in the last 2 weeks about how this is the end of year where everybody's looking at their budgets for next year. It's budget season, right? Everybody's going to be trying to get more done with less next year. And that's going to continue as a trend line in an overall economy for years right now. Sure. It's a rough spot. It's also a really beautiful opportunity for small and lean businesses to find new clients because as they set those budgets and feel that pressure from their bosses who want the same quality for less money, they can now have an option with you who comes in and says, I can get that done for cheaper than that agency and still maintain the quality and give you what you need. That's a huge selling point. So you have to be able to defend that. And then the third is or maybe it's fourth, the networking side of that. Get out there and meet those people, reach out to them. Don't wait for them to come to you. The best way to do it is to participate in the things they're already posting and already doing. That's always the ideal, right? But you don't have to wait for that. If you can provide value to them and open up the conversation without trying to sell them on crap, with just the intent to form a longer term relationship, that to me is the best way to do it. If you do those things, they're going to give you feedback on what to dial in and get better about. Over the course of a month or two, you're going to have your message dialed in for a niche market that you can then start to find those early opportunities, like you said, to get your foot in the door.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good place to leave it.
A Torrey rant? Leave it off of a Torrey
rant. You give us a 1, 2, 3, and maybe a 4, and I think maybe we'll continue on the audience thing for our next episode.
That's a good idea. So many people struggle with it and it's hard. In retrospect, it looks so easy and it's like following your path. You have all that context. And for guys like us, you can look back and be like, well, it just seems so simple and so easy. And I think it's really important for us to sort of unpack how that occurred. Because it could have, you and I both, we could have so easily have steered off into, again, coffee, right? And said, that's our niche because we had the opportunity to do it. And yet we didn't.
/ addiction.
Well, yeah,
caffeine
we are
problems.
Because I wasn't going to mention that part, Josh, but you're right.
Sorry.
We could have fueled our addiction for free. Okay, man, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I would say if anybody's made it this far, for everyone who's made it this far, and you have these burning questions, like you're listening to us talk about our stories of how we chose this thing and how we got this far, like what questions do you still have? Like, what did we not answer? What do you want to know more of? Or where should we go deeper on the next episode? So let us know.
You're so good at that. Good.
All right, brother.
All right, brother. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, see you.
Bye.